It is now time for Diary of a Wrestling Fan with Bill Chase. And now, here he is, the man whose idea of a romantic evening is lighting up dollar store candles and playing some Gino Vanelli on the stereo, Bill Chase! Thank you, Mr. Podcast Announcer, and welcome to another edition of Diary of a Wrestling Fan, the podcast that chronicles my 33 amazing years of being a fan of professional wrestling. Thank you for listening on Spotify, on Anchor, wherever podcasts are streamed. Follow, subscribe, do what you gotta do. And if you're listening on YouTube, hit that subscribe button right now. Well, folks, this week we're supposed to cover part 2 of the Montreal Screwjob to get perspective of other fans, even one who was actually at the show, one who's a diehard Shawn Michaels fan, and a couple others. But sadly, a couple things happened. My schedule and things I had to do in my personal life that got in the way kind of derailed that. The one interview I did get recorded did not record very well, but mark my words, part 2 is coming either next week or the week after. It all depends. But either way, I'm still going to bring you another episode today. And today we're going to talk about one of the all-time greats. It's been 15 years, sadly, since we lost great Eddie Guerrero, and we're going to be remembering Eddie on this week's podcast. Before we get into that, I want to give a quick plug, of course, to Pro Wrestling Ontario. Give us a follow on social media, on Twitter, on Instagram. Also, give us a like on Facebook. And if you're listening to this on YouTube, scroll over the top right of the video. The link to subscribe to the channel is right there. Hit it after you're done listening to the podcast and enjoy some great action from Pro Wrestling Ontario. Complete shows, both Iron Cup tournaments, matches, the backstage shenanigans of Foundation, and so much more. That's Pro Wrestling Ontario. All right, on with this week's show. Again, I apologize for not being able to get to part 2 of the Montreal Screwjob, but we will be doing part 2 either next week or the week after. But I have a backup show ready, and I'll announce that at the end of the podcast, so bear with me. But this week we are indeed going to talk about the one and only Eddie Guerrero. Eddie Guerrero, how can you sum him up? It is impossible to sum him up in a sentence, hence why I'm doing an entire podcast on him. Now, coming from a wrestling family, I can't even imagine the type of pressure, especially in California, especially in Texas, especially in like Mexico. The Guerreros were gods. You know what I mean? The Gory Guerrero himself, the patriarch of the family, was pretty much in a sense the Latino Stu Hart, where he, pretty much bred his kids into the business. I don't know if he had the same eccentricities as Stu. From what I read about Gory, he was a pretty straightforward guy, from what I understand. But at the same time, though, again, much like the Harts, much like the Von Erichs, the Guerreros were born into wrestling. Eddie had several brothers that were that had become stars in their own right, especially in territories. The man that we know as the late great Chavo Guerrero Sr., known for his run in WWE's Chavo Classic, was a pretty big star as well. Like, these guys had a legacy, especially in the California region, and they were well traveled. Eddie had a tall order, being one of the younger Guerreros. And actually, Eddie is he's the youngest of the boys, so you think in some ways you might be able to compare him to Owen Hart. Owen Hart definitely had a tall order ahead of him, especially the fact that when he went to the WWF in 1992, late 91, early 92, he had the tall order following his brother Brett, who was the Intercontinental Champion at the time, and becoming a pretty big star, and had been with the company for quite a while and had immense success as a tag team wrestler. So you can only imagine the pressure Eddie had to face, that his brothers had been big draws in territories and whatnot. So again, you look at it this way. He always seemed like a guy determined to make something of whatever he was given. Obviously, when I get to that, Eddie was given at times on the surface that was seen crappy, but he ran with it. He not only had the drive to make whatever promoters or bookers gave him to work, but he was just amazing in that ring. I mean, my goodness, the way he can make things flow. and he was great at telling a story. I didn't know much about Eddie. I knew about his family a bit from the Bill Apter magazines, Stanley Weston magazines as a kid. I'd read about the Guerreros, the famous Guerrero families. The one I mainly knew about was Hector. I had read a bit about Hector, but then I read a little bit about Eddie from the stuff he was doing in AAA with our bar, Los Gringos Locos. I just love saying that. A heel tag team that I would later discover in tape trading, which I'll get to, that just had incredible heat. Incredible heat. I didn't get a glimpse of Eddie until he came to WCW in late '95, early '96. He really started hitting his stride when the cruiserweight division came about. Now, I enjoyed most of the stuff that Eddie had done. He was really enjoyable to watch. But I remember watching a match with him. I want to say it was against Ric Flair on Nitro. And it's one of those cases where, again, people can say what they want about Rick, and sometimes it'd be true, but he did have a habit of never treating a talent that was underneath the card on him like they were underneath the card of him. Rick never treated, especially when the bell rang, he never treated the guys who were underneath him on the pecking order like that. That's how guys like Sting became big. Now, I'm not saying that Rick made Eddie in that regard. He didn't, but still, that match they had, I remember it being pretty good. Of course, Flair won. But at the same time, though, it never occurred to me that this could be a guy that, who's standing toe-to-toe with Rick, this simple guy standing toe-to-toe to Rick. And I remember I'm like, oh, this Eddie Guerrero guy has some chops. Not like literal, chops, but you know what I mean? Like he has some mileage. And then watching him against, guys like Brian Pillman, guys more his, stature. And I know that's not a vanilla midget joke or anything like that. That's just the fact that Eddie worked really well with cruiserweights. He did. That was just what he was all about. Now, here's the thing. I liked Eddie, always did, even when he was in WCW, but I didn't think he had much of a personality. Oh, was I wrong? Even though I had read about him in our bar in the magazines, I never really saw it. I mean, he's willing to see something in magazines. There's nothing to see it in person. Now, when Eddie turned heel in 1997, I remember I enjoyed watching him in Six in matches. When he began his feud with Rey Mysterio is when Eddie's personality really started coming out. And this guy's an asshole. Going after Rey like this. And I talk, again, check out the Halloween Havoc 97 episodes in the archives. And I was really emotional. Like, I always enjoyed watching Eddie, but he was just a guy I enjoyed watching. There were times I would not be overly emotionally invested in him, even though he was a fantastic wrestler. But see, people can say Rey Mysterio may not have had a quote-unquote personality in that sense, but he had a presence about him that always drew me to him constantly. Whereas Eddie, I would be drawn to him on some occasions not really. But I really started appreciating Eddie both as a wrestler even and as a character after the Rey feud. And then the whole story with him picking on Chavo. Waiting for that big payoff where Chavo finally stands up to him and beats him in that big grudge match. And that never happened. But whatever. The whole shoot on Bischoff. That t-shirt, Eddie Guerrero is my favorite wrestler. I thought that was hilarious. The LWO, again. LWO should have been just an eye roller, but Eddie somehow made it work. He somehow made that whole thing work. And it was around this time I was getting tapes of him at our bar in AAA. And I'm like, oh my God, he's had it all along. I felt like an idiot thinking the guy had no personality. I actually felt like an idiot because I remember talking to my buddy John about this. I felt like a complete moron because Eddie's had this personality the whole time, just wasn't able, I guess, as a baby face, I guess you could say, to show it in WCW. But as a heel, he was showing it immensely. Again, these tapes with Art Barr. And watching him and Art take on Octagon and El Hijo del Santo, these people want to see them get beat. They almost came off in a way as the cool heels do, in the late 90s and going forward. But by God, their coolness is like they were almost so cool that people resented them for it. And with good reason, because they were assholes. Bottom line, Eddie Guerrero and Art Barr were big assholes. And, watching that match is great, seeing the heat behind it and the baby faces getting a big win, but it also makes you wonder what could have been with Art Barr. And it helped Eddie. I watched some Eddie stuff from ECW on the tape trading. Again, some good stuff. But like I said, I hated Eddie in WCW. I really, really hated him. But I was drawn to the personality now as well. I didn't feel like I didn't get distracted. Wasn't changing the channel. In 2000, when the Radicals, Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko, and Perry Saturn all jumped to the WWF after disputes at WCW, I was excited because all four of those guys I thought were awesome. Now, as we know, Eddie Guerrero became Latino Heat. Again, on the surface, if you really think about it, on the surface, like some of you will disagree with me, but on the surface, that's crap. Junk. Trash. I think in anyone else's hand, it would have bombed. I honestly do. I think it's one of those stories that if anyone else was given that story, they would have failed with it. But not Eddie. Not Eddie. Even at the age of 17, I thought it was cheesy at first, but once him and Chyna actually got together, and Eddie's facial expressions, the winking, the shit-eating grin, I couldn't help but I hate him, but oh my God, he's so hilarious. And they made it work to the point where Eddie started becoming a babyface by default, even though he still acted kind of like a heel. And he was great at it. He got that. Him and Chyna got that over huge. Of course, it was kind of grating week after week listening to Jerry Lawler go, Latino Heat! Ugh. Oh, God. But yes, it was a very enjoyable character. Eddie got it over. And I said anyone else would have handled it. And we'll just say, well, Bill, it's not like Latin wrestlers were falling off trees at that point. Well, I know that, but my point is, I just think Eddie is the best to handle it. I don't think some of that stuff would fly today, and I don't think a lot of stuff Eddie did would fly today, probably with the culturally sensitive people. But again, Eddie managed to make it funny. He was in on the joke, And Eddie came up with a lot of stuff he said himself, the stereotypes and stuff like that. And that's what people like Pritchard and all them say. So I just thought he was hilarious. I didn't see him as a negative Mexican Latino stereotype. I saw him as a funny heel who at times was a babyface. Now, Eddie was having a really good run. Then him and Chyna split up. And yeah, he was still fun to watch, feuding with Jericho and whatnot, but that didn't go too far. He had a pretty good match with Test at WrestleMania X7, but this is where Eddie's demons, at least when I learned about them, came to the surface. I didn't really know much about anything prior to this. I would years later, obviously, but I honestly didn't know about Eddie's troubles until around this time. Now, I did learn that he had that car accident a couple years prior to 2001. And there were rumors online that he was having some issues. And they found out, I guess it was in the spring of '01, he disappeared. Where he was injured in a match, I believe with Albert, and was sent to rehab. Now this is the thing that people get wrong. He wasn't sent to rehab, he wasn't fired right away. He was sent to rehab in the spring. He wasn't let go until later in the year when the drunk driving incident occurred. Apparently, there were posts online and on message boards saying Eddie's problems went pretty deep in terms of drug use and drinking and whatnot. Again, these are rumors. Eddie addressed some of these in his book. Some of them were true. Some of them, I don't think, ever came to the surface otherwise. But either way, his reputation of what he suddenly what his demons had done to him had come to the surface. And I felt bad when I heard this because I knew he was a great talent. And I even said to my buddy John, I said, Eddie's a guy who could have been a champion. You know what John did? He laughed. John laughed a lot when I suggested some guys could be champion, and a lot of them became champions, and a lot of them became big stars. So there, John, if you're listening, nah, just kidding. I doubt he's listening. But anyway, when I found out about this and heard he was working the indie scene, again, with the tape trading I was doing on and off at this point, I had seen some of the matches he was doing just prior to the time he came back to WWF or WWE, and he looked great. I'm thinking he looks like he's turning it around, or at least he's trying. Thing is that with Eddie, he never seemed off. So you never could tell. Because I thought on the back of my head, I'm like, well, even just before he left, I mean, he wasn't having, like, him and Matt Hardy weren't, no offense to either of them, weren't exactly like, blowing the roof off the place and stealing the show, but the matches weren't particularly bad. So Eddie didn't seem overly off to me. Mind you, again, maybe I wasn't overly observant at the time. Maybe I could see it differently now. But I guess he was just a guy that when the bell rang, he could be focused. And when I heard the rumors that he was likely coming back, I thought this was great. I thought that, wow. I said, this is a good redemption story. And I was more than happy to see him come back as a heel. I'm like, I just watched a great triple threat match with him, CM Punk, and Rey Mysterio. This is around the time I wanted Punk to become a WWE guy. Rey, I knew I didn't hear any rumors. I just knew Rey was going to get there eventually. I just had a feeling. Rey was one of those guys. He's just too talented not to be in the big time, and he's still there. So there you go. And I remember I got into an argument online with somebody on a message board. Scott Hall had just been let go. Eddie had just come back around the same time. Eddie started an awesome feud, a very underrated feud, I might add, with Rob Van Dam that culminated in an awesome ladder match on Raw. And they feuded over the Intercontinental title. And Eddie, even though, like I said, I couldn't tell anything was wrong with him, but man, did he seem even more motivated, though. Maybe that was the big difference. I don't know. But he was determined to fix his career, which in turn made me believe he's probably determined to fix his life as well, his personal life as well, which later I'd find out that he was trying so hard to fix his personal life. Even though he was a heel, I still enjoyed watching him. I still enjoyed the things he had done in that ring. I enjoyed the feud with RVD. And I think WWE probably could have played this off as a redemption story when he returned. They would eventually, obviously, but They could have, but they still felt, I guess, that he was stronger as a heel at that point, which, to be fair, wasn't the worst decision. So, even at the age of 19, I always hated seeing good talents, great talents like Eddie go to waste. And I was glad that he didn't. I was so glad that his talent did not flush itself down the toilet. Because you hear cautionary tales about great talents like Buddy Landell. I wonder what could have been. Even Art Barr. You wonder what could have been. I know Art Barr still had a good run, but how great could it have been? How great a star Art Barr could have been. So with Eddie back in the company in '02, the shift was coming in terms of how the WWE was presenting their product, the brand extension. Raw was more story oriented in terms of, big storylines, stuff like that. SmackDown was becoming a show, which obviously also has storylines, don't get me wrong, but its emphasis was on these matches that these guys were having. There's guys like Rey Mysterio joined the company, Edge, um, Chavo Guerrero, who Eddie would eventually team up with. There was, I said Ray, man, Angle, Benoit, who would come back from a neck injury not long after Eddie's return. Brock Lesnar. And I was a little sad for Eddie because before he left Raw to go to SmackDown, he was engaging in a feud with Stone Cold Steve Austin. Which I'm like, yes. I said, yes, this could make him into a bona fide main event guy. Even though I'd hated Eddie because of his character for years, because he was such a great heel, I enjoyed watching him. So I'm thinking Eddie should be a main event heel. And of course, Austin walked out, which again, I thought wasn't fair to Eddie. I know Austin regrets doing it now the way he handled it, at least, but still, I know Eddie eventually got there. Spoiler, he got there, but you have to wonder what would have happened if Austin had stuck around in that feud. I'm sure Austin would have won the feud, but I'm sure Eddie could have gotten something from it. You know what I mean? But it didn't hurt him. He went to SmackDown, was having great matches with Edge. People are mixed on that feud, and those matches. I thought they were great. Some people just felt they didn't click. I did. I thought these two clicked very well. I think it's because people see Eddie's other matches, especially when he started taking up with Chavo, a little better. They saw them as better matches. I can understand that. Because, well, I'll even say they were, but I think that's why the matches with Edge just don't, I guess they pale in comparison. I thought the SummerSlam match was actually too short. That was my issue. It was just way too short. Yeah, I mean, so they were given a lot of time, obviously. I know, you got to make time for everybody, but it was a little short. I thought their matches could have been a bit longer. They could have been like 5-star classics, as some would say. So, yeah. So, Eddie starts tagging up with Chavo. And again, these two are, it's not just because they're family. It's just because they knew how to communicate with one another as well. I mean, the way that they just played off each other in promos, the way that they would work together in the ring, it just came natural. They made it look so easy, what comes so complicated to others. Was it because they were part of that famous wrestling pedigree of the Guerrero family? Maybe. Was it because they grew up together? Because Chavo, despite being Eddie's nephew, people still say, or not say, but they sometimes get confused. They think they were brothers. I mean, they were close like brothers, obviously. But Chavo was actually Eddie's nephew. But they did grow up together like they were brothers, more or less, because most of Eddie's brothers were a lot older than him. They pretty much all were a lot older than him. So they had this natural flow of things, and again, the stuff they could do, they just made it look so crisp, so, for lack of a better term, it's elegant. And you could see in some matches, Eddie is his own worst critic. I've seen clips of matches with him where there's just even a minor botch that you won't even really notice unless somebody brings it up. And you can see he was frustrated. And he seemed like a perfectionist. And I think Chavo, in a lot of ways, was the same way, because Chavo Guerrero, as a worker, is very underrated. Very underrated. And you know what? People say, we didn't have Eddie's personality. Who did? Chavo may not have had the outrageous personality Eddie did, but Chavo had a personality. He showed it in WCW. He showed it tagging with Eddie here. I mean, they were doing so well that eventually they had to be turned babyface. They were having those great tag team matches with Edge and Ray and Benoit and Angle. That big triple threat match at Survivor Series is unbelievable. Check that out. Check that out. They became the tag team champions. That was huge. And you know what? I said to John once again, I said to my buddy Jeff Taylor, but he believed it a little more than I did. Or that John did, sorry. And he's going to be a champion. I said, he's got everything. I said, sure, he may not be a heavyweight in the traditional sense, what some fans might say. But you know what? He had the personality to do it. He had the appeal. He had fans. Like I said, him and Chavo eventually became baby faces. They actually became baby faces. Eddie had a great match with Benoit. Again, he was just on fire. I think it was Armageddon. And those vignettes, those Los Guerreros vignettes, oh my goodness. Again, they were able just to be themselves in a way. They use their own material. They always say that a wrestling character is, a lot of people themselves turned out to 11. That was Eddie and Chavo. They were training themselves up to 11. They took those, what some would say, ignorant stereotypes, but made them like a Saturday Night Live sketch almost. They didn't come off as offensive, I don't think. I mean, I can't judge that way because I'm a Caucasian. But still, they were never, I just didn't seem like they were in poor, you can always tell when someone's in poor taste. Those never seemed like they were in poor taste at all. And believe me, there's a lot of stuff in wrestling, in hindsight and today, that can be done in poor taste. But Eddie just knew how to make it work. Him and Chavo both, and Chavo does not get enough credit for making this work. And yeah, it did come to the point where I guess you could say Eddie had outgrown Chavo in that sense, where, again, because his personality is just so insanely appealing, where Chavo, of course, has a great personality as well, but somehow Eddie just had that extra level of it. And eventually Eddie was going to go his own way. I mean, the lowriders, everything just made it so good. Eddie's story truly coming to the surface made him more sympathetic to people. That DVD that would come out eventually. And Eddie was always open about his issues after that. They tried to turn him when Chavo was gone and Tajiri took his place. They got that over. Eddie and Tajiri got over as a team. You wouldn't think so on the paper, but Tajiri's amazing, don't get me wrong. But just like, you think as characters, because they're so contrasting, they won't have the same magic that Eddie and Chavo did. I know they didn't have the same magic, but something was there. They tried to turn Eddie heel, and it was the funniest heel turn because Tajiri being slammed on Eddie's car. He destroyed his car, so Eddie got pissed. You don't destroy my car. They tried to turn him. He feuded with Benoit again, but fans kept cheering him. Lie, cheat, and steal. I may lie, cheat, and steal, but I'm honest about it. It was just, how can you not like that? It's so entertaining. And again, you're getting a guy who cuts great promos and has great matches and is having really good feuds. You can't help but love that. You said the stuff with Team Angle. Awesome. Again, a hidden gem that gets overlooked is when Eddie and Tajiri teamed up against Team Angle at Judgment Day, 2003. Awesome stuff. Then they turned Eddie back face again when Chavo came back. They had a really good feud with the Bashams. Again, the Bashams may be like a punchline now, but you know what? I like their matches. I like the stuff that Chavo and Eddie did with the Bashams. They were just really good matches and a good feud over the tag titles. Now, eventually, Chavo turned, which, again, a lot of people saw coming because nobody was going to turn on Eddie. I think they pretty much got the hint now that Eddie they will not boo him. And that feud itself was fine. I thought Eddie's sadistic beating at the Rumble was a little crazy. Even though he had heelish tendencies still, he wasn't an outright heel. And the finishes, oh my goodness, like I said, Eddie would still act like heelish in some ways, but fans loved it. When he would fool the heels, throwing the chair in the ring and acting like he had just been hit with it, sometimes getting the win because of it, or creating a distraction to get a win. It was amazing stuff. But I said, it's time. I said to my friends, it is time. They need to make this guy a champion. Strike while the iron is hot, and that's precisely what they would do. Once the feud with Chavo was finished, I remember watching a Filthy McNasty's with my buddies. When Eddie hit that frog splash on Brock Lesnar, it wasn't just me. The place was always packed for wrestling pay-per-views at Filthy's. Everyone in the bar, all the wrestling fans, jumped out of their chairs, and he hadn't even got the pinfall yet. Hit the frog splash on Brock. We're already going crazy. We counted along with the 1, 2, 3, and we all roared. We all roared. And I remember talking to John. I told you. I honestly felt good for the guy, knowing his redemption story. It had come full circle. Of course, John being the buzzkill, he's not going to be champion for long. I'm like, oh, maybe not. I said, but he's a main event guy. So he's always going to be in the upper tier of the card. He already was, pretty much. So he's going to stay there now. He's got a permanent ticket there, more or less. So Eddie was now the champion. Really, he had won Vince over. Bruce Pritchard tells a story famously on his podcast. When Vince first met Eddie, he's so tiny. Yeah. But the thing about Vince McMahon, as unfair as he can be, and I'm sure many people have said it, many people have proved it, but there are times where talent will win Vince over, and up to the point where he truly believes them to be a value to his company. And he was one of those guys. Eddie then engaged, of course, in a feud with Kurt Angle, which, my opinion, of course, underrated. They had some really good matches they had a really good match at WrestleMania 20, and of course, that infamous moment at the end where the two men, Eddie and Benoit, I talk about this sadly on my Benoit podcast in the archives. The two guys were not supposed to be main event guys. They were not supposed to be at the top of the mountain. They're closing the biggest show of the year together. I thought it was just a remarkable story. Sadly, as rumors go, the pressures of being champion and holding that mantle, I guess, in some ways got to Eddie. He started feuding with frickin' Bradshaw. That's what I thought at the time, anyway. Frickin' Bradshaw. A guy who had never main evented a pay-per-view in his life. Frickin' Bradshaw. That was my reaction at the time. More recent fans, just think of Jinder Mahal. Only unlike Jinder, at least Bradshaw, becoming known as JBL, would actually sustain a pretty good run out of it. Jinder literally had his run as champion, and that was it. So, but that was the reaction at the time. The negative reaction to Jinder Mahal becoming champion was the same negative reaction that JBL's main event push was getting. That being said, however, the character was convincing. He was a true vile heel that had no likable qualities whatsoever. Talking about illegal immigration, making fun of and again, it pushed the line. It almost crossed the line. It didn't quite get to the point where it was in too bad a point. Okay, the whole thing with Eddie's mom having a heart attack, sadly, which became a real heart attack, apparently, that was bad. That was pretty bad. I don't like heart attack angles, never have. Other than that, though, the feud. No, thankfully, yeah. I'm trying not to trivialize that. She thankfully survived, but the feud itself had a lot of heat behind it. Fans were rallying behind Eddie more than ever, but apparently numbers were down too in a lot of ways. House shows, granted, but I mean, I don't know. You can analyze that a million different ways too. A lot of people do. Eddie was still scoring big with the demographic, and again, it was the Latino demographic was a big thing for SmackDown, and Eddie was scoring high, and that's something that apparently was very important to Vince. Was that key demographic? So, of course, after escaping with a DQ win where Eddie just was so bloodied up that it could have harmed him in a much worse way, a match that, again, I actually don't. I know. You know what? If I understand some people like blood, and so do I, in blood rivalries, obviously. But man, it was just way too much. And poor Eddie, I am shocked that he got through it the way he did. He still managed to finish the match, still managed to keep up the performance. It just goes to show how passionate he was about wrestling. He was practically risking his life. They had that payoff in the bull rope match, which still protected Eddie in the loss, but freaking Bradshaw was champion. Yeah. Freaking Bradshaw. So anyway, Eddie continues his run, and he's still doing really well at this point. He still has a lot of momentum behind him. He's still one of the most popular guys on the roster. He's still in the upper tier of the card, even though he kind of lost his feud with Kurt Angle. Because him and Angle continued to feud through 04. They had some great matches. But Eddie didn't really get much of an upper hand in that feud. I mean, in the actual matches themselves. But it is what it is. Can't win them all. It felt like, even though he wasn't being slotted down the card too much, again, he's feuding with Kurt Angle, who's a bona fide main eventer. It still felt like you wish they could have done a little something more with him. And I was thinking, this guy should be a champion still. I read the dirt sheet rumors about, him being champion was kind of taking a toll on Eddie mentally and whatnot, but still, this is a guy I liked a lot, and I wanted to see him on top. He got from a heel. He got from a guy that was good in WCW that I really enjoyed watching, but wasn't really wasn't one of my favorite wrestlers yet, who became a guy I couldn't look away from. Became such a great character that I was entertained by. Even when I wanted to hate him, I found it hard to. And met a wrestler, great redemption story. My fandom for Eddie evolved so much over the years. But at least going into 2005, him and Ray. Oh my goodness, him and Ray. the evolving of this rivalry, and we'll get to some of the questionable things about it, if you will, in a second, but it was just supposed to start out as a friendly rivalry between two partners who, again, had been tag team champions. People say, and again, I think their matches in this feud, this 2005 feud, don't get the love they deserve because, again, everybody compares it to Halloween Havoc 97. Again, check it out in the archives. I talk about it quite extensively. Again, when you have a match that amazing, it's going to be hard to top, no matter how great you may be. And make no mistake about it, Ray and Eddie at this point were on different levels of superstardom than they even were in WCW, and they were both popular in WCW, or at least were over. And as the rivalry continued to heat up, you knew Eddie was going to turn. You just knew, but how? And are people going to buy it? Are they going to boo him? Part of me didn't think so. But the way Eddie became so cold after he finally betrayed Ray and just beat the piss out of him. I remember now, they lost the titles to Eminem. No, not the rapper. I said a little too fast. MNM, yes. Mercury and Nitro with Melina. He just beat Ray so bad. And the look on his face showed a coldness that gave a whole new dynamic to Eddie that we'd never seen. We saw a bit of it in WCW, but this was even more, for lack of a better term, scary. It was more almost like borderline psychotic side of him, which we saw a bit of in WCW, granted, but even a bit of WWF, but not to this point. And I thought, wow, he's truly become a heel again. And I'm thinking, this is great. This is truly great. And I remember when he came out to SmackDown to cut that promo on Ray the next week, the cold look in his eyes. I remember Michael Cole and Taz being scared when Eddie grabbed the chair at ringside. Those little things like that help sell it. He sets that chair in the ring. The crowd is hating him. He has a new remix of his theme song. The Lowriders are gone. Everything that was likable about Eddie is done. Eddie didn't even utter a word, and then those fans chanting, Eddie sucks, Eddie sucks. And just that look he'd give just drew their ire even further. I was loving this. Such a tremendous story. Like I said, it's easy to get hooked on something like this, especially when it involves such great talents as Eddie Guerrero and Rey Mysterio. And the funny thing is, Eddie barely won a match in this feud. Matter of fact, I think he lost every match to Mysterio on pay-per-view. But he still maintained that hatred because they always found new ways to keep it fresh. But again, back to that promo, he just looked so possessed by that competitive rivalry, what it had done to him. And that the fact that he felt he had to betray Ray, it didn't make him happy. I remember the screaming, "Duh, do you think it makes me happy?" He pulls the mask out, Ray's mask. Do you think that makes me happy? Like, wow. he lost it. Why'd you make me do it, Ray? Like, oh my goodness. And the little things that he did in this promo, I said, go to YouTube to check it out. I don't know if it's still on there. It was. His hand is shaking. You got to keep it out of aggression, but at the same time, though, it just adds that almost like a nervous tick, you know? Little things like this is what made Eddie such a great performer. And he blames the fans for stealing his passion. And, it's just such good stuff. And then Dominic happened. Okay, people can say what they will about the storyline, and they'd probably be right for the most part. But by the time, okay, so a lot of you know it already, I'm sure, if you listen to this. You're an Eddie Guerrero fan, you definitely know it already. The whole ordeal. Ray and his wife had trouble conceiving, yada, yada, yada. Eddie was really Dominic's biological father. It was a secret that Eddie would hold over Ray's head. Ray managed to win a match to avoid that secret coming up, but guess what? I lied! Eddie lied and still revealed the secret anyway, and it led to the custody for Dominic ladder match at SummerSlam. Yes, it's kind of silly, it's kind of cheesy, but somehow, again, this is the charm of Eddie. He made it work. Fans still reacted to it, and when that match happened at SummerSlam, fans were invested in it. This is the crowd. It was a great match, too. Like, that ladder match between them, I say, is close to their Halloween Havoc match. Not quite, like, in that regard, but just see the way the emotion behind it is close to the Halloween Havoc match. Might be an unpopular opinion, I know. But again, the Halloween Havoc match is still number one, just to clarify. But out of their series in the 2005 here, I think this was their best. Even though, where's Vicky? Yeah, but like, Vicky missed her cue, but really, it wasn't to the point where it ruined the match. So, at least in my opinion. The Ray won, the big payoff. And like I said, the crowd was into it. The I'm Your Poppy. Oh, that was like, heck. T-shirts, everything. But of course, even though Eddie had a tremendous heat behind him, the fans hated him now. Sadly, I just think they realized they weren't going to be able to keep him heel forever. He entered into an interesting feud with Batista where they were becoming somewhat friends. And, Batista had that iffiness, could he trust him? Then they had the No Mercy match where you're thinking Eddie's going to betray him at any time to win the title, but he doesn't. He still wins, and they maintain their friendship. And you notice as time goes on, Eddie starts seeing the error of his ways. Fans are cheering Eddie again. And I thought they had an interesting thing with Eddie and Batista going on at this time, because I'm thinking any time, it's just maybe you're waiting for me. This face turn isn't going to last. Eddie is finally going to betray him and take the championship. Because he lied! I was waiting for it. I think a lot of us were. So even though they were turning him face and I thought it might be temporary, I was happy, but I thought maybe they couldn't resist anymore. They can only go against the grain so much. And it worked. Don't get me wrong, it worked when they did it, but after the Ray feud was over, where else was there to really go? Other than Batista. So, Eddie's what would be his last televised match. I was leading the Survivor Series, the whole Raw SmackDown feud. Eddie won a spot on Team SmackDown by defeating Ken Kennedy. A typical Eddie classic finish where, again, he makes it look like Kennedy hit him with a chair. He didn't, though, and Eddie got the win. That was the last time Eddie Guerrero would wrestle on TV. It was the last time Eddie Guerrero would wrestle. On November 13th, 2005, Saturday prior, I was out with some friends. Pretty late. I remember I was hanging with my best friend at the time, Adam Powell. and a bunch of my friends from the church. I remember we went out to eat, watched a bunch of movies after, I believe, at Adam's apartment. So I was up pretty late, meaning I got up late. My parents had run off to run, I guess, do some errands or whatever, because they didn't work Sundays. I got up, showered, went on the computer, found out I went on MSN. My friend Heather messaged me about maybe 2 minutes after I'd been online, saying, "Oh my God, did you hear about Eddie Guerrero?" I thought maybe he got fired. Maybe he relapsed and he got fired. Sad way to think, but I clearly didn't want to think the worst. She had then said he died. And I'm like, what? So right away, I hop on one of the wrestling news sites. They said they just found him in his hotel room. And they did have the rumor that Chavo was the one who found him. And I was, God, I was just hoping it was a mistake. But I started going on major news sites and they were carrying it. They were carrying the story. Wrestler Eddie Guerrero dead at 38. I remember slinking back my computer chair. I shook my head. I said, after everything he had to fight back from what he'd been through, the mistakes he had made, how he fought to rectify them, how he fought to turn his life around. His book was about to come out called Cheating Death and Stealing Life, which is just an eerie title now to think about. It's so surreal. And I read that book later on. I'll get to that, but it just felt unfair. It just felt very unfair. Just for his family, obviously, more than anything. I remember they were taping both Raw and SmackDown that night. I knew about that. I knew they were taping both shows the Sunday night. I didn't read any spoilers because I was afraid if I did, I wouldn't end up watching it. It was hard enough watching the Owen Hart tribute. I remember that. It's still very fresh in my mind, still to this day. And then just seeing Chavo, Ray, of course, Benoit. The sadness just flowing through them. And then they did not one, but two incredible tribute shows for both Raw and SmackDown. The only time we ever got to see Rey Mysterio and Shawn Michaels for a while. I know they had another match on SmackDown years later, but it was one of those dream matches, and it was in tribute to Eddie. Chavo, who'd been doing a ridiculous character at that point named Kerwin White, was back to being Chavo again and paying proud tribute to his uncle. Like I said, it just felt unfair. To me, Eddie could have been a main event guy, top tier guy the rest of his career. If it had continued on his terms, I think he could have been a great trainer, working down at the Performance Center. He could have taught this guy so much. So much. Make no mistake about it, though, he is right up there with Shawn Michaels in terms of modern influence on many wrestlers I see even to this day, including one of the biggest stars in the WWE, Bayley. big influence on her. She was there the night he became champion. It was rough. Obviously, I felt worse for his family more than anything, true, but as a fan, it's great that he had the run he did, but for it to end like that. After I read his book, not long after, it felt like a bigger crime that he was taken away. And again, I felt even worse for Vicky and their girls. They were robbed of their father, husband, and wrestling was robbed of a unique and amazing talent that could have given back so much. That's why even 15 years later, it's not just me talking about him. A lot of people are. In 2003, I went to a house show here in Hamilton. It was actually literally just a couple days after the blackout. Yeah, the blackout was on the 14th and the show was on the 17th. So I had my dad's camera there, and thanks to my cousin's uncle, we were able to score front row tickets. So I had my dad's camera, and of course I got some great shots, but no shot beats the one I got of Eddie. Eddie was the U.S. champion at the time. He went up to pose on the ropes. I zoomed in a little bit, snapped a shot, and it was perfect. When I got the pictures developed, it was absolutely perfect. I'm like, if Bill Apter could see this, you'd be in a magazine. So I had the picture in a photo album with the rest of the ones I took that night, plus at other shows. And shortly after Eddie died, I felt that, because even though I love my photo albums, I like looking through them, but there are times I'll go forever without looking through them. And I felt that picture of him in all his glory deserved better. I got that photo album out and I put it in a frame. And it's been in that frame ever since. I want to thank you all for tuning in. This wasn't exactly the most happiest show in a lot of ways, but at the same time, we should remember Eddie for the great things he did contribute to the business, and the fact that his legacy still lives on and influences so many young talents today is truly remarkable, even after 15 years of being gone. He was right to the very end. He was just captivating audiences. So once again, I want to thank you all for joining me. And I suggest you watch some Eddie Guerrero if you have the WWE Network, or just look up some stuff on YouTube, whether it be from WWE, WCW, AAA, anywhere else. You won't be sorry. Next week, it'll either be part 2 of the Montreal Screwjob if I can get those interviews out of the way. If not, I will be covering the wedding of Test and Stephanie McMahon. That was a very pivotal time for a certain game player, if you will. And we're going to talk a bit about that episode of Raw, what led up to it, and what followed was pretty significant, shall we say. So, until then, either way, you have something to look forward to next week. I want to thank you all for listening. Follow me on Twitter, BillChase33, also the same handle on Instagram. Add me on Facebook. If you want to chat wrestling, I'll gladly chat wrestling with you. So until then, this is Bill Chase, quoting the late great Billy Red Lyons, and I tell you, don't you dare miss it. Thank you for listening to Diary of a Wrestling Fan with Bill Chase. If you'd like to make a contribution to the show, just always remember, if you're not cheating, you're not trying.